Hello, this is Jon Croft, and this is Cultural Warfare with Jon Croft. How's everybody doing? So here we are, another week of great stuff going on, getting closer to even better stuff. And Rebecca's here. How you doing, Rebecca?
I'm doing great. How are
Oh,
you doing?
good, good. Let me see if I can turn you up. There we go. Say that again.
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Yes, you are. I'm doing awesome. I got my pipe here. Remember I told Marcus Pidman I was gonna meet them some point when they do their thing. Got my little pipe here.
It's a pipe.
It's a pipe. Oh my goodness. So we are talking about the great legendarium. Legendarium is a term that comes from the Catholic Church that's about saints, the saints. And let me see if I can actually find that. There is an explanation here, specifically, more specifically. Um, let's look at this. Legendarium. Based on search results, Catholic Legendarium refers to a liturgy, or I'm sorry, a literary collection of legends, particularly those detailing the life of a saint. It could also be a compilation of hagiographical accounts, which are stories about lives, miracles, and martyrdoms of Christian saints and blesseds, they call them. Often these stories are embellished with supernatural elements such as visions, miracles, and divine intervention to illustrate the saint's virtue and devotion to God. So, in the Catholic tradition, legendariums have been used to promote devotion to specific saints and promote and to provide spiritual guidance and inspiration to the faithful. Let's not forget, though, that J.R.R. Tolkien also had a legendarium, and this was for his mythological universe that he created. Um, but essentially it's the same kind of thing. It's these are the stories of his heroes and his own saints in his universe, right? So this is supposed to inspire us and teach us and guide us and help us in the ways of, becoming saints ourselves possibly, or heroes of the faith in some way. So I've written an article a while ago, and this is why I get into this. But a while ago when I started MediaMoses.com, I wrote this little article and didn't follow up on it too much because I wasn't ready yet to follow up on that yet. It the article was called "How We Will Journey Out of Hollywood to a New American Legendarium." So that is the proposition here, and this means that a lot of people are not going to understand what that's about, and that's fine if they don't read Tolkien, if they're not Catholics. I'm not Catholic. Like they don't have to, you don't have to be all these things to understand what a legendarium is necessarily. A legendarium is like a collection of stories about a saint or a group of saints. There's even specific ones through history that are famous, such as, let's see, what are some of the names of these legendariums? The Golden Legend is probably the most famous legendarium by Jacobus de Voragine, the South English Legendarium, the Anjou Legendarium, a 14th century manuscript containing legends of French saints. So these are some popular legendariums in the past, right?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Are are the legends are they meant to be true or meant to be not true?
I'm glad you asked that question because if you notice the explanation for what a legendarium is, Um, on this search engine, right, which I used to give you the definition of a legendarium, it says these stories are often embellished with supernatural elements, such as visions, miracles, and divine interventions to illustrate the saint's virtue and devotion to God. So, in the definition, it's kind of like they're saying, don't believe this for what they say.
Yeah.
No, these are exaggerations,
Hmm.
the truth is that it's true and not true at the same time. So it's true that these exaggerations or hyperbolic statements about the miracles of some of these saints um, possibly were exaggerated, right? But we also know that many of these stories were not meant to be seen as not factual, not meant to be seen as not real. In fact, saints have to be, in order to be canonized, right? They have to actually do miracles, like real miracles. So in the stories, this is the thing. And this is how I learned about what myth is by learning from Santa Claus. So Santa Claus is a great example of how this works. How myth works and how these legendariums work is that the saints both did these things and did not do these things. So uh, let's just put it this way. Myths are stories, but they're stories that talk about truth. So the deeper truth of stories doesn't have to do with facts. It has to do with meanings behind these things. So, this doesn't mean that God isn't real. It is. It does mean he's real. It doesn't mean that these saints don't do miracles. They do. They do miracles. But Catholics understand how to tell a story. At least a lot of these guys understand how to tell a story. And so when they tell the story of Santa Claus, right, they don't start out exaggerating who Saint Nick was. They start out just telling you the facts. Why? Because they want him to be canonized. And so I'm not saying that in none of these cults have Catholics ever lied about their saint of choice. No, I'm not saying that at all. I think that there's cases of that actually. But there are also cases like in Saint Nick's case, in Santa Claus, in which the exaggerations of his story are very important in how they're exaggerated. In other words, they're exaggerated in a way that's kind of obviously not true, right? So, you know, the 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 story of Santa Claus giving to the entire world children, toys to children all around the world in one night is obviously not true. But was Saint Nick a great giver? Yeah. Did I shatter your conceptions? Yes, now your faith is shattered. This is what people think is if we don't believe in Santa Claus, our faith is shattered in God, right? This is nonsense because we already know it's not true, right? But what is true is the deeper, more important lesson that we should give, right? That we should be giving, and that we're learning from other people like Saint Nick and like Santa Claus how to give. We're learning how to do these things and why to do these things, right? And so for a Christian, it isn't really just about Santa Claus, it's about Jesus. And it's about the fact that he gave his life for us so we could be saved. So there's a deeper meaning here that has to do more with the truth than it does with facts. And so a lot of people don't understand the difference between facts and truth. Facts are the minutia and the detail, and the truth is the meaning behind it and what it's all for. And so, someone could do something that seems unloving to you. It doesn't mean that they don't love you, right? So the truth is the reality of if they love you or not. And the facts are they made a mistake and they did something that was unloving to you, that you interpreted as unloving. And so what's more important there? You know, the more important thing is that this person actually loves you, and these temporary facts, these temporary choices and the details and the minutia in the story can get in the way of the truth, right? They can make you believe that something is true when it's not. And so facts, the facts of science, right? The facts of science can be told in a way that makes you believe God doesn't exist, but it can't prove that, right? So it can make you believe that truths are not true. Facts can make you believe that truths are not true, but they just can't do that, right? So Santa Claus not being able to deliver presents around the world in one night doesn't disprove that Santa Claus was real. It doesn't disprove that he was a great giver of gifts. And it doesn't disprove that Jesus was a great giver of gifts, right? So there's a different kind of um, these details of how to tell a story are very important to understand, right?
Well, it's
And
interesting.
yeah, and but one more thing,
Yeah.
because I wanted to answer your question about what a legendarium is, what a myth is, how these people tell these stories with these saints, right? Is that they do often embellish,
Hmm.
but the way they're supposed to embellish is in order to illuminate the truths that really exist behind this story.
Hmm.
So often a saint will do something like someone like is it Saint Francis who talks to animals and stuff? It's like he'll say they can talk to animals, but that isn't the point, whether he
Hmm.
can talk to animals or not. The point is that he showed love to mankind through his great love of animals. And
Yeah.
and I think it's undoubtable that therefore he had a connection with animals. He had a special connection with animals. That doesn't mean he could talk to them, right? The way we talk to our neighbor, to each other. No, that's kind of ridiculous, right? Kind of like Santa Claus is kind of ridiculous. And yet it's not. It's not ridiculous. Because first of all, could God make Santa Claus go around the world in one night? Yeah, he could, actually, but that's not the point. St. Francis could talk to animals if God allowed him to, but that isn't the point, right? The point is that St. Francis was a great example of love to us and to animals, and he showed his love by caring for animals, right? So, you know, many of us can also have special gifts, talents, abilities. These don't necessarily mean that we're a superhero or that we do miraculous things every day. We might every now and then, and then disbelieve it ourselves and be like, I don't believe I did that. You know, that's not the point. The point is that there's a truth hiding behind these things that don't need to be hiding there. You could discover them, and by thinking about these stories and legends and myths on a deeper level and asking God to illuminate the truths in these stories for you, you are accomplishing a great deal by then reading these stories as opposed to just having some fun and entertainment, right? Now you're getting something deeper out of these stories that's about real life. That gives you purpose in life and value in life. So myths do that. That's what myths do primarily, is they inculcate our value system, and therefore that myth becomes a delivery system to us of values. And so when we meditate on these myths, whether you're reading The Lord of the Rings or what have you, when you meditate on these myths, you're going to get deeper meaning out of it. And some people, they'll just watch the movie over and over again. And you can do that and get deeper meaning out of it that you didn't realize was there before. The Bible is the same thing in that sense. But I think the Bible is just pregnant with a lot more meaning than our own human stories. So the Bible just has a divine amount of truths embedded in them. And whenever you read it, you're like seeing more stuff, but that can happen with human storytelling as well. So, my did I answer your question? Do you think?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, you did.
Good.
I just was thinking about the embellishment and why the need to embellish, because
Right.
I'm thinking, God is amazing and these visions
Hmm.
and miracles are amazing, and I don't understand the need to embellish. But you kind
Yes.
of answered this question as you were talking, this idea that I don't know the language, and I apologize for being very ignorant about
No,
Catholicism, but
I
if you're
am
trying to
too.
prove that someone is a saint, then yeah, you might exaggerate stuff because you've
Yes.
got something to prove.
Right.
Whereas if you're just an individual enjoying God and here's a story about your life, you don't have anything to prove. You're not
Right.
trying to prove um that you need some special honors or
Right.
something. So I guess I can see why there would be a separate category where it's not
Hmm.
just a miraculous story or um, the lives of the saints. It's not just these things, it's an actual embellishment,
Yes.
um, which always feels a little like, you know, let's why would we embellish it? We don't need to embellish it, right?
Yeah, I think I
Yeah,
have a similar beef with a lot of this, just as a course of action that you would need a group of people to hyperbolize about this saint because they could gain some benefit from that, right? The truth be told. But I think that there's also the deeper, because I'm not going to go so far as to say that there is no honest Catholic person. They just don't exist. That's just not a fair
no,
judgment
it's
to
not.
make. You know, I mean, they are Christians, so they have to follow, they have standards on their lives. And so, I'm not a Catholic personally, but I'm not throwing all Catholics under the bus by saying that. But I'm also not going to say that there never was ever one of these cult groups that didn't embellish a little too far, let's say. And unnecessarily so. Because one of the things as a storyteller myself, I really find just wonderful is that um, first of all, many of these stories, legends of saints, I actually believe literally. And but here's why is because well, first of all, I'm a believer in God and I believe miracles exist. Um, but like you said, why would you embellish something if it's already amazing?
Yeah,
So I believe that many of these stories already were amazing. I do think, a lot of the legends that I did read of the saints, I noticed that at a certain point, it looked like the scales were tipping on the side of I have more interest. I have a greater incentive to embellish in possibly a dishonest way than I do to be honest. And so there's a certain point in Catholic history where it feels like, and in some of these stories where you can almost see, well, this was an unnecessary embellishment, right? But like before that, let's say we're talking 700, 800. AC, even up to 1,000 AC, up to about, you get to about 1,300 AC. And they start seeming a little bit like, I don't know. I don't know about that. I'm not saying all of them are that way, but like there was this hard break. But I remember reading a few of them that was like 13 or 1,400. And then they discovered that some of these claims were not factual and not, not based in reality, that that the purpose of them was to, canonize this person so that they could benefit financially, because that is the case. There are some Catholics who would benefit from their dude being canonized, because this benefits their local parish or their
Yeah.
local, monastery or what have you. And so a lot of their things become relics or become, you know what I mean? Like these things could happen. But I think that the earlier church, I really do not believe that most of them did that. Um, I think that if there was any embellishment, it was guesses that these things were holy relics. Like, I think this is a holy relic that comes from the Holy Land because of thus and such. And they really didn't know, they kind of went on a whim or they went on a feeling or they prayed about it and they felt God said yes. And so it was kind of like maybe they were incorrect about some of those things, you know? Um, but I think that that's far less of an issue than like lying about a saint. I think that's a bigger issue because that can benefit them personally, you know. But also, we don't want to miss the point of a lot of this stuff. Again, the point isn't to take the um the story of these saints as literal necessarily. So that's where I think that many people go awry if they're going to be critics of the church or critics of a lot of these people, is they go awry because they're missing the whole point of it anyway. To make accusations or to say these people are terrible people or they're benefiting financially. Like, okay, well, then don't give money to them, right? Like you don't like them, whatever. That doesn't make all of these monasteries and all of these people incorrect or liars, or terrible people because one or two of them did these things, right? But again, the point isn't even if it was factual. That's not the point. The point was to tell a deeper, to transmute a deeper meaning behind who these saints were and what they accomplished and the love of God through that saint's life, shining forth. So in Tolkien's example, right, he has fictional characters in his own legendarium. These are fictional. They're not based in real people necessarily, right? And yet they are. Like, how are they based in real people? Well, Gandalf is like a type of Christ. He could be a type of Christ or a type of God the Father, right? And I've never seen someone compare him to the Holy Spirit, but that's probably possible as well. Um, and so, but he has multiple types of the Godhead in his stories. And then he has multiple types of like the apostles, the disciples and apostles in his stories as well. And you can look into that as well. So it's like we don't want to miss the point in the hyperbolizing of these characters. A myth is a hyperbolizing anyway. Like a story is an exaggeration in many ways. Sometimes what you find, you get inspiration for your stories from real life events. And then you exaggerate them in your story. You change the names and faces, right, of this person that you actually know in real life, and they become a character in your story. And you're inspired by this person in real life. You make them a character in your story, and then you exaggerate what they did. You can't completely change their character and the things they've actually done because this loses its the veracity to the story. It's no longer based then on this person. So if you deviate from the real person too much, it loses the meaning and the truth behind it, right? So you're inspired, you could be inspired by a saint, or you could be inspired by this or that. You put them in your story, you could change their name or whatever, but writers and artists often do this. We're often inspired by things around us that make us that that inspire us and have values in it in that person's story. And then what we do is we kind of borrow about that person's life and change it just enough to make a unique character and put it in our story. And now there's a real, like a real realism to that character because they actually are based on a real person. And so this is not weird or strange or bad at all. This is so normal for artists to do this, you know? And so like we will, like the Mona Lisa was a model. She was supposedly a prostitute that Da Vinci painted. And is that painting anything about her prostitution? No, it's nothing about any of that stuff. It's about the quizzical look she gave him and how that mysterious smile was interesting to him. And so there's truth to that that shines through, but um, so much of it isn't about, some of it's just about what you get out of it, right? The truth is she might not have looked exactly like that. He maybe changed some things about her to make it a better painting, you know? So there's things about this that artists do. They have take a little bit of artistic license, and then later you would never know that. They just, they created kind of like the stories of these saints, right? There's a real person with that name that did many of these things, and then the story gets exaggerated in a certain direction to make a point, right? To create something that's interesting and unique, to create a story that's compelling, right? So the point isn't necessarily to take it all as factual, right? So our modern time has really missed this point because we're so like immersed in facts and science. Like we think this is the most important thing ever. And it's really not. Like it's not because the truth is there is no meaning in any of it. There's no real values and meaning and purpose in it. So that's the stuff that we're missing now. We're missing like the meaning and the purpose. Like why do you get up in the morning and do work? You know, just to be stimulated. Like that's what's the meaning in that? So um but did that answer your question?
Hmm.
So my article, I figured I would read a lot of my article um tonight because I haven't really done that before, and I realized that some of this needs to be updated, but some of this also need to get to writing part two of this finally. Um, so again, it's called How We Will Journey Out of Hollywood to a New American Legendarium. And so I'll start reading this. This Exodus was no picnic for the Israelites in the wilderness, and it's no easy wasteland for us to brave either. There is a time to suffer, I say, and a time to grieve, and a time to forget the past mistakes we've made. Now is not that time. Suffering is for those who did the right thing, even though the cost of such um, an act was painful. Grieving is for those who have lost something, some seemingly before expected. Forgetting mistakes is for that particular time in which remembering one's mistakes will not assist in our healing and mending for the future. But we're in a time in which readying our footing for the hard work of tilling a new field for planting is upon us. So, what will it take to accomplish this? So, what do you think of that so far, honey?
It sounds good.
Yeah. Is there anything that stood out to you?
Um, you mentioned tilling the ground.
Hmm.
That stood out to me.
Yeah. Um, so there's pain and suffering, right? There's suffering of that goes into tilling some soil, right? But it's not the pain of grieving, right? Or forgetting mistakes. Um, so there's a difference, right? Um, right now, the kind of pain that we have to do is for us, it's difficult work we have to do, right? In other words, it's not time to grieve over our past mistakes, our
Yeah.
past loss of potentially our country or a Western civilization. This is um, a terrifying realization to come to when you realize that our society as it is in many ways collapsing, right? So this is terrifying. So, we could sit here and cry about it, or we can get to work. So that's basically what I'm saying there. I'll continue on. So we have established that suffering, grieving, and forgetting are not appropriate. We must instead ready ourselves to truly suffer after we have ground every stone to powder that blocks us from tilling new soil. This tilling will be painful, and if we think we've already experienced pain by witnessing the death of our old American heroes at the hands of Hollywood and the new culture that assails us, we're truly mistaken. There is far more pain ahead of us. Grieving nor suffering can be appropriate because by now we ought to have seen that this has been a long time coming. Hollywood has been moving this direction for years, decades even. So please understand that we gave up Hollywood to them. It wasn't taken from us. This was an act of apathy and misplaced trust. Fool me once, right? So that's kind of an extension of what we just said, but we're bringing it to the next level, right? Like, let's stop grieving, understand, especially, and this is also why we stop grieving, understand that this wasn't really taken from us. We kind of foolishly gave it up. And so, if anything, committing ourselves to this work is a fair act. It's a work we failed to do before. Now we're going to have to do it, right? So this is ahead of us, understanding that also that our foolishness in the past has led to this. So part of our work is learning to stop being this kind of foolish person, right? Who lets someone else um, do this kind of thing that Hollywood's been doing to us. We can't allow them to do this, right? To us. Um, okay, continuing on. Finally, instead of forgetting our mistakes, it's time to remember them. Only by remembering them can we adjust our sails towards better fishing waters. Only by remembering them can we adjust our attitudes against future apathy and future misplaced trust for villains instead of the heroes we ought to be emulating. These villains were in charge of Hollywood for decades, and we never noticed it. Why do you think that is? We were magnetized to the wrong priorities. This must adjust, or we will again fall into the ditch, and this field will not get tilled nor seeded with stories that can change the future. There are real techniques to farming, fishing, storytelling, and trusting the right people. Did we think that these rules didn't exist? How foolish we were. So you can see I'm digging in here on this point that we've been kind of foolish on this point and that point and that point. And we have a great work ahead of us to seed this ground with new stories to get us back on track. But my belief is that rehashing this, and fighting over these old stories in some ways is foolish. Um, the ones, especially the ones that have been dirtied and changed and morphed. We're going to need to seed new stories. So we need new storytellers, new writers, new artists to do this. Because the more they're influenced by the old, the more that's going to color their work. So we need new artists to be involved here. I'm not saying that old artists can't do it at all. That's silly. But I do think we need a whole new group of new artists as well to help freshen the pot. So, any thoughts on that, honey?
New artists, new stories.
Yeah,
I like it.
something we have to do, right?
I just keep thinking of this sounds silly, but I just keep thinking of like Johnny Appleseed
Yeah.
and some of these American folk tales that we're going to be reading with our kids this year
Uh-huh.
that are just folk tales. Like they're
Right.
not really meant to be about anyone real,
Yeah.
but they, are like possibly exaggerated versions of a real person.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
They have a lesson to them.
they have a lesson to them and they inspire.
Right.
There's something really distinctly American about those particular folk tales
Yeah.
that were from, you know, some of the early stages of American cultural development.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Stories that kind of define America and separate it from other places.
Yeah. And one of the things I want to say here too is that as I get into part two of this little talk here, is that I'm going to change it into no longer an American legendarium, but a Western legendarium. And the reason for that is multivariate, but I really believe that um, we have to go deeper than just America. I think
Yeah.
that we have to go just to the West, the Old West, and the Western civilization. And I've been very inspired by the Greeks and and Europe and even Roman places. But even before the Greeks, there's just some very influential stuff that happened for our culture back then. And I think we've forgotten so much of that stuff that we need. In other words, it's almost like we need a new foundation built on America. I'm not saying the Constitution was not good or that our founding documents were not good. I think that they were incredible genius works. And so we need to remember those things. But what I'm talking about is more the soul of the man, right? Is the way we think as Americans, which has been a lot of the problem is we're not thinking any longer in terms of Christianity and Western civilization. We're thinking in terms of like, well, how do we get our politics right here? Or how do we solve our community problems or culture problems here in the United States? How do we solve? Well, the way you solve them is by going back before America, right? Like foundational stones. Like, why did we care about freedom? Why was that important? Because what I'm seeing is a lot of people, even Christians and even conservatives and people that they don't even know why we're free anymore. Like they're skeptical. They've become skeptical even of the good things. Like they've become so damaged by so many of the philosophies and ideologies today that they no longer even believe in freedom. And if you can't believe in freedom, how can you believe in Americanism, right? You can't. So what the first Americans believed was a whole group of things that we don't even believe today.
Mm.
So in order for America to exist, you have to believe a lot of that stuff. And that's what I'm discovering is that a lot of Americans don't even believe that stuff anymore. So how can they make America a better country if they don't even believe in freedom? Like it's so foundational. And so as a Christian, obviously we have a longer history than America as Christians. And one of the things we have is that we have freedom in Christ, right? But that means something. It's not just a term, it's not just embracing freedom in general, right? There's a whole understanding here that you go into when you read the epistles on Paul and how they got to where they're at in Acts, and before that with the Gospels, and before that with the Old Testament. It's not like freedom just came out, was just a Pauline invention. No. I mean, the Hebrews are escaping slavery in Egypt. They're going to freedom, right? So why are they going to freedom? To have the freedom to worship God in the wilderness, right?
Mm.
So what were the pilgrims trying to do when they were leaving Europe? They were wanting the same thing,
Yeah.
freedom to worship God as they thought was the right way to worship God, right? So it was the same journey.
Yeah.
And we have the same journey today, but many people don't see it. They do
Yeah.
not see that it's the same journey. This is why I called it Media Moses, and why I said it's an exodus out of Hollywood. It's not an exodus out of America. It's not an exodus out of certain political things, whatever.
Yeah.
No, it's out of Hollywood. Why is it out of Hollywood? Because the culture guides all of these other things. So if you just change your politics, you've changed it for like 4 years. It has barely no impact, right? And that's what we keep getting wrong. We're not going foundational enough. We're not going back to the roots of why we embrace freedom. Why? And can a person who's not a Christian even be free? Because how can they have freedom in Christ? How are they having freedom to go worship God in the wilderness? They're not. So what is their freedom used for if not to worship God? Right? So these are important questions because the answer to that question will tell you why our society is screwed up. It's because they're being free to do naughty bad things. That's that's all they want freedom for, is to take rights from someone else and to harm someone else, right? And harm their community. They want the freedom to do that. Well, I'm sorry, but we don't have the freedom to do that. That's not we that's not why God gives us freedom. So God is not going to give us freedom to do all those things. And if we try to do it, we will fail, right? Because you're just trying to do whatever you want. Kids don't get to do whatever they want, right? So these are really important things to learn if you're trying to like understand what's wrong with our culture and you maybe even want to engage in culture creation, right? Later on, we'll talk about the Hebrews in the desert, right? On their exodus and the relevance of that, how they're basically engaging in culture creation. But they don't just do that. No, they have to follow what Moses says, and Moses has to follow what God says, right? And so they have to see God a certain way. And if they do that, if they can bring themselves to following God and obeying God, then God will illuminate, right, what makes their culture work, what makes a new society work, how to found a whole new nation, right? Why were they wandering around for 40 years? Why do you think that was? Was that what God wanted? Did he want them to wander around for 40 years? No, he actually
Mhm.
didn't want that for them.
Yeah.
It says that. That wasn't God's plan. Did you know that? It's not, I mean, you know, they were afraid to follow God. They were too afraid.
Yeah.
And so God's like, well, you're going to need more lessons now,
I
right? You,
saw a
yeah, go,
reference to that story recently.
yeah,
And I don't know the timing of all of these events, but basically they went to the the city. I guess it was Jericho. No, it wasn't Jericho. Anyways, they went
one of
into
those. Yeah,
this area and they said there were giants in the land.
yeah,
And then they said, and we saw ourselves like grasshoppers,
yep,
and they saw us like grasshoppers.
right.
That was like how it was phrased. It was like the emphasis was we saw ourselves as nothing, or,
All about optics, what you
yes.
believe,
And
right?
because we saw ourselves as nothing, they saw us as nothing too. So I
It's
think
not
that's
like
like a big
later
part.
on, it's not like later on God didn't teach them how to defeat giants. He did. They just didn't believe they could at the time.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. That's the thing we also have to do is get past this belief, this notion that we cannot make culture, that we maybe don't have the right or don't have the ability or don't have the pizzazz or what have you. We don't have the plans. We don't have the whatever
Yes.
you need to do it, you know? That's never true for me, right? I have the plans for everything. But but like, we might believe a certain thing about ourselves. That's just not true. And that thing is keeping us from believing we could do these things.
Yeah.
And that's the only reason it takes 40 years. You could be doing it tomorrow, right? Or at least, you could be following God's plan, right? His ideal plan for you is, you know, this and such, so you're following, if you're following him, he's not really trying to make it hard for you, but the truth is these are giants and you're going to have to defeat them. Oh, I'm sorry. You don't want to be victorious over giants, right? So, we can't think about these things as really as obstacles, really. We just think of them as lessons. God is our Father. He's teaching us lessons. We have faith in him or we do not, right? Because the truth is, you really don't even need to have faith in yourself at all. Like, sure, you can look at yourself as a grasshopper, but if the point is that you have to look and see something in yourself in order to accomplish something, well, that's the problem, isn't it? We shouldn't have to look inside of ourselves and be like, I don't know if I'm good enough for this. If God sees something in you and he says, I know he can do this, well, who should you be listening to? Yourself or what God says about you? Who really
Yeah.
has the skivvy on it? Do you have the skill? Like really, you know what you're capable of? I mean, goodness, in the stories of when they did conquer these cities, they did miraculous things, things that they couldn't have done by themselves. You see what I'm saying? Like they didn't need to have the ability to do those things. God just did it for them. All they had to do was what? Show up, participate, believe, right? They're participating in this great story, this great moment of conquering, right? Because really, what the Israelites are conquering most is not giants, they're conquering their own fears.
Yeah,
That's really the story.
right.
Them going like, oh, I guess I missed the point. I was supposed to be listening to you all along and not to myself and my own fears, right? And that's really the false God, isn't it? The false God ends up, and that's one of the great stories, right? The great lessons of the Exodus is that it wasn't about defeating Egypt. It's about the Israelites defeating themselves and their own egos and their own fears and their own faults and their own issues, right? That's really what it was about. So this is an issue with us, not Hollywood, right? See, this is why I focus so much on Christian film and on conservative media, because the issue isn't Hollywood. The issue is us, the same issue. If we have enough bravery, courage to make great art, we could be making better art than Hollywood. We could be doing that. We just don't have the courage to do it. And we don't have we don't have the investors to do it or whatever. We'll do it anyway. Just do it anyway. We don't need them. So, of course, that means we can't make the next Star Wars. Okay, that's what it means. You can't make the next Star Wars. You don't have the money. But what can you do? You can build something that comes from that script, right? Star Wars 2 or whatever. You got the script and now you've got if you've got great storytelling, you don't need George Lucas's sets and all of his robot, droids and all of that stuff to make it a good film. You could do it without that. So, yeah, some of these things do set it above other films. The production design on that film is genius, right? But like you could still make a good movie, you know? So if you make a good movie that's cheaply made or whatever, okay, now maybe you'll get one or two investors, right? Because they're seeing that you have talent as it comes to actually making a film with a interesting story, maybe some good acting, maybe some good cinematography. These things don't necessarily cost a lot of money. You just have to be talented enough as a film director to pull those things off without money. And this is very possible. You just have to believe that you can do that. So this is the same kind of journey essentially,
Are
you
you
know?
saying that his divine power has given us everything required for life and godliness through the knowledge of him who saved us by his own glory and goodness? Because I agree.
More or less. Yeah. How did you know? You.
I was just reading your mind.
I love it. But yes, so well, let's move on with the Legendarium because I wanted to read more of it because this is some good stuff, right?
Yeah.
So this next section in this article is the reality of art and morality. Making new ground cannot go in reverse, just as morality doesn't become weaker in time, but must be seen more clearly by truth-seeking eyes. So that's kind of a loaded statement there, and it's got depth to it. Um, We don't acknowledge fascist evils or the inhumanity of slavery, and then roll back our attention meant to be trained upon the potential future slavers and future authoritarians. This doesn't make us wiser, but all the more fools when we've seen their kind before and already defeated them in history. We must then recognize and admit we have failed to stay vigilant and recognize the bad kinds of Hollywood storytelling that has failed over and over in history. So, obviously, what I'm saying here is that making new ground can't go in reverse. Obviously, we could go in reverse, right? But that's pretty foolish. That's my point, is it's very foolish. It's not moral. It's very immoral to do that. When we study history, the point is to see the mistakes in it and go, wow, I don't want to make those mistakes. Not to go, that looks great. Boy, I want to do that again. World War II, let's do that again. What? No, we don't want that. So that's the point in reading all these terrible stories, right? That's the point in the Holocaust Memorial. It's not to go, oh, that looks great. What? What's wrong with you? No. The point is to say, what caused this? How could we have done this? That was really dumb and evil. And so people who don't believe mankind can be evil or even are evil, what? Like, where are you getting your information from? This is very foolish to believe that, you know? So, I'm not saying I believe in total depravity necessarily, right? But goodness, look out. Evil can be among us. We don't even see it, just like it was in fascist Germany. And now we got to get wise to it, right? And we've got this whole story of lessons now in the history books to teach us, oh, probably shouldn't do that, right? And so let's not be that foolish person again. Um, we have to get wise to this. And we have to recognize also that we already have failed in many ways to stay vigilant um, as it comes to this Hollywood storytelling nonsense. But there's a lot of other stuff we should be learning from too. Okay, continuing on. These are not gray areas in which subjectivity reigns. No. If you are truly an artist, you know the dirty secret that pretend artists love to pretend doesn't exist. That art is actually not subjective, that the reason we assume it is that we like to minimize merit. We get consuming art confused with creating art, and we confuse our truth with actual truth. But in music, you actually know chord progressions or you don't. You hit the right notes or you don't. And in color composition and contrast, you're either in the realm of nascent beauty or bitter ugliness that becomes less striking and more unkind and painful the more you look at it. But more appropriately, when all these crafts can tell a story, either that story sings of profound truth and objective meaning, or it crashes and burns into a mass or cacophonous, contradictory sloganeering and bilge, made for collecting cash instead of inspiring the fellow traveler who never knew they needed to see such profound weaving of character and plot. It was for a person's good to see such truths instead of being subject to offensive lies. You can pretend that you won't need to follow the instructions on a medicine bottle because it is not in the realm of your truth, but I assure you that you will wish you hadn't disregarded the truths that can save your life. This is not as urgent in its results, and so we stop taking it deadly serious, but it is just as necessary to hear truths in storytelling. You can always thank the master storyteller later, the one that you thought was a bigot or an old codger, until you look closer, right? This is how we take the Bible today. If you're not a Christian, So many people I've met today, they're not a Christian. They look at the Bible like it's just a whatever. Who cares? Right? Well, look closer, right? This old codger or whatever has some truths that lay down on you. And I'm not talking about myself, by the way. I know I look like an old codger, but I'm talking about God, right? So God wrote the book and he's going to lay down some truth on you if you let him, you know? He whom he corrects, he loves. So if you're feeling corrected by God when you read the Bible, good. That means he loves you.
Yeah.
Enjoy it. So so truths don't just come around, right? Like it's important to cultivate art and artists that are good with truth, giving you real truths in their plots and in their stories and in their characters and their meanings. These things are important. So that's what we need more of. We need to get rid of all this bilge that's just like just trying to take our money and indoctrinate us into some political system. Ugh, what a waste. Okay, continuing on. So how painful truly is storytelling? How difficult? As a past filmmaker, I can tell you it's incredibly difficult. Yeah, and incredibly expensive too. But not in a way many expect. What Hollywood used to understand very well was that it's about honoring craft. And a craft, especially as a part of an art form, is almost purposefully difficult. It's a constant uphill battle socially and financially as well. If you're a talented artist, at least that becomes a salve for you when the other difficulties become too much to bear. Because well crafted art contains catharsis for the artist, right? Some kind of healing. But if you aren't talented artistically, you must be a masterful liar instead, right? You're fooling people. This is why Hollywood is full of two groups of people: seducing grifters and suffering artists, right? Totally true. Almost diametrically opposed as human beings. They don't get along. They somehow get indistinguishably mashed together in a Hollywood cocktail party. I have no idea how that works, but it does because so many people will put up with so much in order to be noticed and adulated for the small piddling amounts they've achieved. It's sad. This is so true, though. Um, and Hollywood relies on those two kinds of people. They take advantage of the artists, the suffering artists. That's why they're suffering, right? They take advantage of these suffering artists. Often I've seen it's the screenwriters who get taken advantage of, or the actors who get given for a ride. All these classes to become the greatest actor ever. Oh my goodness. You know, and or for a director, oftentimes it's money. They need the money to make their film. And so what are you going to do for all that money? You got to give your script over to someone else. You don't have artistic control at all, quite often. So what's the point? You know? Um, okay. So we talked about how these two types of people in Hollywood. The Hollywood craft that replaces art. A craft should be keeping us in a form of discipline and self-refinement. But all too often, the refinement is not how to improve the craft itself, but instead how it morphs into the craft of fooling others into thinking we are artists. When we arrive at a place like Hollywood, it's that kind of place. It's so much nonsense, so much posturing, literally all the time. The financial difficulties just up the stakes to use your new nonsense art form even more. They require you to refine it so that even an insurance agency, bank, or investor will be fooled just as well. I've seen people do it in front of a PA all the way up to a bank, and some of it isn't just Hollywood, but American business, period. What I'm talking about is hucksterism. right? You're selling a product. You're good at selling a product, and you're not an authentic person about it, right? So that's the new nonsense art form I'm talking about here. Um, American business, this also happens. It's just that the sheer amount of snake oil salesmen per capita are likely 10 times greater in LA County proper, that can corrupt any industry. But I think the star power nonsense in Hollywood and the incredible amount of cash in LA just increases the severity of it, right? This is something else we must learn from and fast, because if we do not, we will literally build a new town with the same idiots in it in record time. So let's not do that. So, in other words, we have to learn the lessons of how Hollywood has failed to create a good community that actually cultivates art instead of cultivating hucksterism, right? Just fooling people. Oh, this is going to be a great film. Let me pitch it to you. This is going to make money. It's going to make somebody famous. This is all hucksterism. It's not how art is made. It's not something good for culture, right? So this is why I put that in here, because it's really important if you want to make a new Hollywood, you know, understand that you should not take these habits with you. And there's a reason for that. Because if you don't talk about the reason for that, you're not going to know what to do instead, right? Because
Yeah.
you want something healthy. You don't just go like, oh, I've got a bad diet. Let me just get this other diet. It's just as bad, but it's not the old diet. Like, what? No, you got to learn why this is a bad diet. And now you learn why not to do this other diet too, as a result. Okay, do a better diet. Well, what is that? Well, what is a healthy diet? Right? What's going to make a human body healthier? So these are all things you have to learn. Right? It's not just about avoiding one or two things. It's about shooting for something that's good and right. So these are far more difficult. This is why the story of the Exodus is such an important thing to study, because that's what God was teaching them. He wasn't just teaching them, oh, don't be Egyptians. No, that's not good enough. So, yeah, there's a lot to learn there. So the nature of the grift, um, and maybe I don't need to read all of this because some of it is just about not being Hollywood. Um, but there's plenty of good stuff there. Um, man, I don't want to not read it. I'll just read it anyway. The nature of the grift. So there's something to learn from this here, which is that sure, you may always find grifters wherever you go. But instead of just accepting that they exist or allowing their existence and moving on, we should instead learn how to spot them and learn how to discourage their growing influence in the community. This includes learning that it doesn't pay for ourselves to do grifting either. Learning these things in order to hide our grifting is low form of hypocrisy. The reason it's so low is that it rubs elbows with do-gooders while building an immunity to doing good ourselves. We've got the answer right there. We're just used to our bad ways. You have to have a heart, uh, cold hard heart indeed, to talk about what's good without even considering if it's the kind of thing we ought to be doing ourselves and well. Crazy. This means we have to be changed by these truths as well. We have to truly care about making the kinds of systems of accountability that even we can't escape from. That's the kind of business climate that will build real growth. This is why I had to read this. Still pretty important. Business and community organizations that are actually trustworthy, right? What a concept. Hollywood accounting that gets checked by neutral third parties. Hollywood parties that aren't inappropriate, casting couches that are just couches, right? And that encourage third parties and social accountability. Like, why would you not want to keep people accountable unless you are in on it, right? Uncorrected, it's these kinds of moments in Hollywood that the unsavvy look the other way, right? Thinking it's a consenting adult moment, but it's all too often a criminal moment that is easily disguised. Like, let's stop being silly. This is what's going on in the world, right? Um, and people buy it, which I still think is hard to believe, but it's true. We have to stop looking the other way. This has to stop being our culture. A new improved Hollywood isn't coming. Instead, it's only a completely different paradigm that will replace it. One in which the hidden tricks that fooled us before just doesn't fool us anymore, right? You're learning from it. This isn't a political or feminist trope. This was a different trick by the same kind of Hollywood grifter. And if you notice, these same people who were fooled by the first grift also get fooled by the second. How does that work? They learn nothing but new terminology, an academic trick of the modern school system that failed to teach students to respect a diversity of schools of thought. That's true. I've seen that in college. They they know one school of thought, but not another. And then they can't respect the people of the other school of thought. In college, you can see this between biologists and philosophers, the hard sciences versus the philosophers. The philosophers get no respect, essentially. And yet it's how to clearly think. Doesn't make any sense to disrespect philosophers at all. Um, okay. These issues all reek of institutional betrayal, not unlike when the religious institutions of the past betrayed the faithful adherents of that institution. And the Reformation, Renaissance, and Enlightenment arose in response, right? That's right. Christians have been here before. And we ought to apply what we've learned to this scenario, right? We need another Reformation, guys. And it's not about the church this time. It's about our ideologies, about our culture, right? So, the nature of the new kingdom. And what have we learned? One, that even the best of institutions can misuse power, especially power that's been misapplied, which is easier to do than we may have assumed. Two, that severing ourselves from that economy or repudiating the values of that past system isn't enough. We have to actually set out to build our own society and future, sometimes even in a new land. We must refuse to see ourselves as victims of these past systems. Instead, use our strength to work within this new system to build following principles instead of destroying the past system, right? So it isn't about destroying Hollywood. It's about learning the lessons of what went wrong and using those lessons to build something better, something good, right? Attacking Hollywood is not the point,
Yeah.
right? And God attacking Egypt wasn't necessarily the point either.
Hmm.
A lot of people miss the fact that all those plagues, yes, it was about getting the Pharaoh to humble himself, right? But what that was really about also was about defeating their false gods and saying, okay, guess what? Our God is bigger than your God. And you can rely on your gods if you want, that's fine. But if you say no to the God of these Hebrews, you will get punished. Okay. So don't do it. And so it was a lesson, right? For the world, not just for Egypt. It's a lesson for the world that guess what? There is a real God in the world. So it's a witness. It's the gospel message, right? Just told in different ways, told in different terms. Um, okay, moving on. So building a new thing in a new land. We must refuse to see ourselves as victims, which I mentioned. Yes, not seeing yourself as a victim is important because that prevents you from achievement, right? You think there's something wrong with you, or you've been harmed, or someone, oh, I'm gonna get that person. You're again focusing on Hollywood, focusing on Egypt. Leave it in the past, man. That's how you make something new anyway. Forget about the past. So, so it's not about destroying the past system. It already destroyed itself by betraying goodness and truth, not by betraying us. So it's really about God, not us. And Egypt, this is why I say this about the plagues. Egypt was trying to say something about God. They weren't, it wasn't about the Hebrews, really. It was about Egypt being too proud to acknowledge that God is real.
Yeah.
So it's about these gods going at it, right? And the real God's going to win. So, and that's what happens. And that's why we have this story. And I don't even know what the Egyptians at that time believed because their story was not enduring, right? And this one was. So, um, these systems destroy themselves, not when they betray you, but when they betray goodness and truth. That's how you destroy yourself. That's how Hollywood destroyed itself by betraying goodness and truth. So, number four, so don't take it personally by recognizing the truth, right? It's not about you. You, us, ourselves also have to recognize the truth, which is why the Hebrews were in the desert for 40 years. They also had to recognize the truth. So God is giving a lesson to the Hebrews and a lesson to the Egyptians and a lesson to all those Egyptian gods all at once, you know? So here's the truth of it. Jesus himself, the embodiment of goodness, said that the world will hate us because it hated him first. John 15. What this means is that these are epic battles of good versus evil, not of us versus them. We have a duty to remember that we are no greater than our master, in some ways, no better than our enemy. All that really distinguishes us from them is our master. Whether we will uphold truth, goodness, and beauty, or whether we will likewise, like our enemy, betray these principles for personal power, this is what can make us stand apart or become just like them. In other words, these principles are what battle for us if we follow them. So the truth, goodness, God, these are the things that battle for us. We don't have to do it, right? We just allow truth, goodness, and beauty to work through us to make something good and true and beautiful. It's the beauty that's doing it, not us, right? So these become our muses, right? God is our muse who owns all of these things, and he just distributes them as you obey, right? So this is what can make us stand apart. Um, so we must follow them, not subvert them. And just as the past system betrayed these principles and lost, we can lose in the same manner if we are not careful. In John 16, Jesus said, "Why our joy will be complete. Yes, we may be persecuted for loving good things and for loving God." But he said he would send the Holy Spirit to testify of him, and that what makes our joy complete is that the Holy Spirit will give us peace, peace with God, right? That's what shalom means, by the way. It means peace with God, which is what matters. And we may especially find joy in that he assures us what? I have overcome the world, he said. He did it. In this assurance, we can stand behind our master. We know that one day truth, good, and beauty shall literally overcome the world, and that this has, in a deep spiritual level, already occurred. It's just already been done. We just have to live it out, right? The world just hasn't accepted it yet. That's what I write. But it's true. Good, true, and beautiful stories have always participated in overcoming the heart and enamoring the mind of the world until one day the world will be conquered by his power and love, right? With him as our master, our savior, and our Alpha and Omega, these stories will never die. Bam. Enjoy it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think amen.
Amen. That's why these are legendariums, right? That's why these are myths, because they never die, right? These are saint stories, stories of the saints. And so, how can we do this, right? Tolkien had a legendarium as well. Tolkien's legendarium was about his kind of made up saints, right? He had a genre he called mythopoeia, in which he was basically creating myth. Myth generally doesn't happen that way. Myth happens by you wait 1,000 years and see what it endures. Well, we're telling this story still, but we don't remember those stories. Okay, that becomes your myth, right? It's the enduring one. And so then you look at it in a different way. You're like, well, there's a reason, right? There's a reason we talk about Citizen Kane, right? There's a reason we talk about so many other films that maybe were a little older, but they ended up being enduring, like The Wizard of Oz or something, right? They're enduring. So these become like myths. Like The Wizard of Oz is like an American myth, right? And in many ways, it's the story of Hollywood, right? But um, what Tolkien was teaching us is that if you have a proper understanding of myth, you can create a myth. And he said what gave him basically the authorization to do this was God, because he saw himself as a sub-creator of God. By recognizing God as the creator, you can then follow in his image as an image bearer of Christ and become a sub-creator. You're not ever supposed to see yourself as great as God. You're just the image of God. But this does say something, doesn't it? It says that we follow in his footsteps. It says we do divine things,
Yeah.
things that are like they're divine. This is why he lets us do miracles. He wants us to participate in his creation, right? So that's what Tolkien was teaching Lewis. This is what saved Lewis. He realized that was uh that myth was true. It had truths all embedded throughout it, right? And these things are often actually even more powerful than just reading a history book about what happened, right? With a bunch of facts riddled in there. But what's the real story? The real story is read it. Stuff like the Bible is really amazing at this, right? Like you might not believe that a big whale swallowed Jonah. That's not the point, right? The point isn't, oh, I don't believe that, you know, that could have happened, you know? Who cares? That was actually Jonah being a type of Christ because he was 3 days in the belly of death, like Christ was 3 days, right? In the belly of death himself. How did that happen? How does that work? What are the facts, right? So a lot of these things are about giving glory to God, pointing towards Christ.
Yeah.
And in the time of Jonah, Christ didn't even happen yet. So how does that work? It allows us to look back now where we are now. Jonah's doing it in faith. These things are happening, things that he don't doesn't understand the significance of, right? But now we have the benefit of all of this vision behind us and going, oh, that was significant. That was God preparing his people, right? That was God talking to us in the future. If you believe God is God, he exists outside of time. And he exists where he could go to Jonah right now if he wants to. And he can be here presently and he can be in the future right now. Right now. So he exists outside of time. And I actually think that personally is that we have a particle inside of us that ties us to time, right? And so all of us are tied inseparably to time, just physically, right? And this is just, God is not, you know, limited by this, obviously. So um that's just my own little theory. But like, um, you know, I think that the Legendarium as I think of it right now as a Western Legendarium. Um, because I think we need to return to a lot of ancient studies, whether it's biblical studies or what have you, so that we can understand why freedom is so important in America, why tolerance for your neighbor and love for your neighbor is important, which really means kind of free markets, right? Because free markets are the expression of love for neighbor as you create a product that your neighbor needs, and then your neighbor pays you for it, right? They're blessing you in return. You're gift giving to each other. Then this benefits your community. Like this is um like a praxis of Christianity. You're just practicing your Christianity by loving your neighbor. So there's a reason all these things exist. And our sense of justice comes from the Bible, straight from the Bible. So I fear that just a lot of people haven't been studying these things and they don't know the significance of them. So, they're kind of relying on hundreds of years of fumes of other people who studied the Bible and put it into our system. And now we don't even know why it's there. You know? So this is a cultural exodus. And without the cultural change, all these things like politics, all these things like how you treat your family, these really important things, your job, you know, all these things are going to have less vibrancy and understanding and meaning and power to them. So you're not going to understand why you did the wrong thing here and there. You're not going to understand why you feel slighted when someone does something to you and they shouldn't be doing that. Like you're not going to understand so many things. And so building into the culture is what allows this to happen, what allows this to change, and what allows us to go through the wilderness without, without having to live in fear of the challenges that are coming across our way, coming across our path. Like, oh, how am I going to do this? How am I going to make this happen? Don't live in fear about it. God put you here for a reason. And so you can be one of these legendary saints if you believe. Isn't that the dividing line really between these people who just did it in faith, went forward in faith,
Yeah.
and then the people who were, constantly waffling around, not believing they could accomplish these things anyway. And so they're just in the desert year after year, not figuring it out. We don't have to do that, folks. So, that's my episode for today. And did you have any extra wonderful questions or thoughts or just observations?
It's just a lovely idea to think of creating myths and heroes that are like relevant but also timeless.
Yeah.
That, in this case might be, like you said, Western
Mhm.
heroes
Right.
specifically. And, maybe taking an aspect of Western culture that we I don't know, revere and making that a character, personifying it,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and making that a myth, a legend.
Mm.
Sounds neat.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're reading The Princess and the Goblin, aren't we? So we're starting to see some cool stuff in there. Like when I saw when you were reading about the Princess Irene's father, the king, I was like, this is Gandalf. This is where Tolkien gets his Gandalf from. I mean,
Neat.
obviously he wasn't the only inspiration for Gandalf, but he's a pretty big inspiration. I think he even describes his nose as like a hawk, which is like almost
Oh,
exactly like Tolkien describes Gandalf's nose.
yeah.
There was a few small differences there, but there was some real noble qualities that Gandalf shares with the king of from the Princess and Curdie or the Princess and the Goblin.
Yeah.
The second one is Princess and Curdie, I think. And we still have to read that too, but it's just good stuff.
Yeah.
But I'd like us to have some future episodes where we do some reading on here. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
That would be great.
Yeah. And then we can kind of illuminate some of those things real time while we're reading it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, love you guys. And I hope that you enjoyed my article I wrote. I wrote that like a year ago. It's on the website, How We Will Journey Out of, what is it? What is it called? It's called How We Will Journey Out of Hollywood to a New American Legendarium. Um, and I think part two is going to be out of a new Western Legendarium because I want to go a little more broad. There's some pretty cool stuff. Like I'm like imagining like moving to like um not moving, but like going somewhere in Europe to where there's like an expert on Greek mythology and Greek history and trying to get some really good wouldn't call it like documentary stuff, but like recordings or writings on Greek culture and history at the time so I can do the Hoplite movie. I just think that would be just so great because that it has a lot of symbolism in it. Some of the stuff we're talking about with heroes and legends and things, and it's got a lot of. I also wanted a story in which I could discuss um, some of the themes of Western civilization in the beginning of Western civilization. Um, and little things I've said before, which is um, planting trees under which you'll never sit under its shade, those kinds of things. Aesop's fables, so many other stories from that time that are so charming and like have so much truth in them. The phalanx is another thing. I love that concept of the phalanx. The free city states, these are really important concepts. I mean, we could end up with less freedom than these city states in Greece if people have their way
Mm.
politically these days. They don't even understand like so much they don't understand. It's such a shame. But yeah, so let's tell some great stories and illuminate some of these great truths. And I'm just excited for it. So, and I'm
Yeah.
hoping we'll connect with other people who are like-minded and who
Yeah.
also want to tell great stories and some talented people. So, we'll see.
Yes. Where
Well,
can people find more about you, John?
I'm online somewhere, splattered on the pages of X somewhere. I don't know. No, I'm you can find me at John Edward Croft. I'm also at Cultural Warfare with Jon Croft and at the Media Moses. And my writing is obviously on mediamoses.com, and most of our stuff is on there and also on our YouTube page. And so yeah, where can people find you, Rebecca?
You can find me at Rebecca Loves Jesus on YouTube and um, Jesus Loves Rebecca on Instagram.
Yes. And I hope we'll do a When We Love Jesus episode sometime soon. So we'll see.
Yes.
All right. Love you, everybody. And stand up for the culture. All right. Good night.
Good night.